Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. If you're looking for the video I did on Fauci earlier this morning, it got the axe. It got taken down. Here's the funny part. I appealed it, so I think it'll get put back up. But I looked at the guidelines that they said that I could have possibly broken. And the only guideline I could have possibly broken in that video was this one: claims that wearing a mask is dangerous or causes negative physical health effects. I'm reading this right off their webpage here. But if you guys saw the video, you remember I wasn't the one that made that claim. It was Fauci that made the claim. I played the clip of him making that claim way back in March or whenever it was, April of 2020. And I was using that clip to demonstrate how he's contradicted himself. But the irony here, and this stuff gets so unbelievable, you just can't make it up. That the YouTube bot algorithm, what they do in videos like this is they take everything you say and they turn it into text, and then they run it through their algorithm or their bot or whatever. So that bot can't differentiate between me saying this and Fauci saying it. So they think that I said it and my video gets taken down. All you can do is laugh, right? So hopefully I'll win the appeal, but that's the level of insanity that we are dealing with today in 2021 going into 2022. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about inflation. So let's dive into a chart that I think you're going to find fascinating. And I'm saying secret intel because no one's really talking about this. And I'm not sure why, because I think it's very, very important going into 2022. So let's start by looking at this chart. So this is the consumer price index and core inflation. So the blue line is the CPI, and the red line is what they call core CPI, which is minus food and energy. And the red line is a lot less volatile. That's one of the reasons, at least so they say, the Fed likes to use that as kind of their benchmark. But let's go back to 1969. Right around 1969, and you're going to see Richard Nixon reference this in a clip I'm going to play here momentarily. The CPI was up near 6%. Then fast forward to August of 71. So this thing's kind of touchy. So we'll just stop here at July. The inflation rate right around 4%. So why is this date important? Because this is when they implemented price controls. Because inflation was just getting too high for the average consumer to handle. And obviously, from a political standpoint, inflation is no good. It's the no bueno zone for politicians. They know that there's a very low probability they get reelected. So when inflation was at 4%, according to the CPI, well, just keep in mind, guys, that now what is the CPI? 6.8%. And even core is 5%, 4.9. So higher than what it was in 1971 when we got price controls. Now, a lot of you probably weren't alive, or if you were, you probably don't remember what Nixon was saying back then. And I'm sure when you hear price controls, especially for younger people, they say, "Oh, George, you're just fear mongering. That could never happen now in the United States." I mean, that was just something way back in the 70s. Like, I mean, we were a third world country in the 1970s, weren't we? Obviously the young people have no recollection of what the 70s were like. And that, to be fair, I don't have any recollection of what the 1940s were like, and barely the 1970s because I was born in 73. But they just think that that was so long ago that that had to be some, uh, really dire situation that just isn't reflected in the CPI numbers. So I'm really comparing apples to oranges. But fortunately, we have video of Richard Nixon addressing the country when he imposes wage and price freezes or price controls. Now, I want you to listen to what he says right here. We're going to listen to about a minute of this clip and ask yourself if you could see Joe Biden saying the exact same thing today. I mean, verbatim. Let me adjust the volume and let's get to this clip.
Element of the new prosperity is to stop the rise in the cost of living. One of the cruelest legacies of the artificial prosperity produced by war is inflation. Inflation robs every American, every one of you. The 20 million who are retired and living on fixed incomes, they are particularly hard hit. Homemakers find it harder than ever to balance the family budget. And 80 million American wage earners have been on a treadmill. For example, in the 4 war years between 1965 and 1969, your wage increases were completely eaten up by price increases. Your paychecks were higher, but you were no better off.
So your paychecks were higher, but you were no better off. I mean, is that dramatically different than what we see in 2020 and 2021?
We have made progress against the rise in the cost of living. From the high point of 6% a year in 1969, the rise in consumer prices has been cut to 4% in the first half of 1971. But just as is the case in our fight against unemployment, we can and we must do better than that. The time has come for decisive action, action that will break the vicious circle of spiraling prices and costs. I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days.
There you go. And what did he say? That we need to take decisive action to control these prices that are spiraling out of control. And again, I'd ask every one of you on this live stream right now, can you not see Joe Biden saying the exact same thing? And, we need to take bold, aggressive action to control these prices that are crushing the poor and the middle class. And then someone says, well, Joe Biden, isn't that because you're printing so much money and you're distorting the economy and destroying it by lockdowns? Oh, no, that has nothing to do with it. No. This inflation we're dealing with right now that's crushing the poor and middle class is because these greedy entrepreneurs, these greedy capitalists are just raising prices because they hate poor people. And so we need to push back against this greed and just insatiable lust for more money. And so I, Joe Biden, and the authoritarians, the central planners, are going to stand up for the little guy by instituting price controls. And we're going to stick it to those capitalists that are trying to take advantage of you. I mean, I can almost write his script for him. But I'm sure Klaus has already written the script for him. And you can see, for those of you who weren't alive back then or think that, oh, well, George, you must be comparing apples to oranges. I'm sure there was something going on in the 1970s that made this far more dire than this, the economic outlook we have for 2022. Listen to what he said. Inflation was at 6%, went down to 4%. But it had quite a few years of wages not keeping up with prices, just like we're seeing now. It's literally the exact same environment. Nothing is different. And I can assure you of one thing: the politicians sure aren't different, in the sense that they'll do everything to get reelected. And that's exactly what Nixon was doing. I mean, deep down, he had to know this was a stupid idea. I mean, every economist, whether they're Keynesian or Milton Friedman, I mean, it doesn't matter where you were on the, as far as the school of thought that you subscribe to, you're telling him that, listen, price control is a bad idea. But he does it anyway. Why? Because it's the only way he can get reelected. And I mean, are we to assume that Joe Biden wouldn't do the exact same thing? And I'm not just throwing him under the bus. Trump? And Trump would do the exact same thing in a heartbeat if he thought he could get reelected because of using price controls. But now let's go back to the chart, because here's where it gets interesting. So you'll notice they implemented price controls in August of 71, when right around 4%. But when did they get rid of the price controls? When did they allow? First of all, you notice how he said 90 days? Wrong. 90 days turned into 2 years. Reminds you a little bit of 2 weeks to flatten the curve, doesn't it? But they did finally remove the price controls. When? January of 1973. Here we go. So hopefully you guys can see my screen, and you'll notice that the price controls were lifted when they thought they had broken the back of inflation. What Richard Nixon did was genius. It worked. You can see the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN coming out and saying, thank goodness we've got this incredible leadership from Joe Biden, that he was willing to come in and implement price controls and do something that all the economists thought was crazy. But he took bold, aggressive, decisive action for the poor and middle class, and he fought back against those greedy capitalists. Thank goodness we have Joe Biden. But then all of you rebel capitalists know what happens when you implement price controls. You get a shortage of stuff. And the quality of stuff that you do have goes down tremendously. Why? Because people can't produce the stuff at a profit. So they've either got to not produce the stuff or produce stuff that's garbage. But what happens when you lift the price controls? Then all of a sudden you have all this pent up demand. What happens to prices? Well, look at what happened to prices when they lifted the price controls in January of 1973. What did they do? Inflation went from, we'll just look at the core, 2.5% to basically 12% within a matter of 2 years. So inflation went parabolic, exploded higher, because of one of the main reasons, because the price controls that Nixon implemented in 1971. So what's my point? My point is, I think there's a very good chance, not 100%, not even close, but there's a good chance that Biden will implement price controls in 2020, 2023. And if he does, what you should expect as someone that's paying attention, I mean, the whole reason you watch this channel in the first place, so you can have an edge. But you as a rebel capitalist will know that if Joe Biden comes out and implements these price controls, or maybe it's Kamala Harris then, what you will expect is the supply shortages that we are already experiencing will get far, far worse. The quality of goods and services will get far, far worse. And when they do lift the price controls, if you thought inflation was bad, in 2020 and 2021, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because if history is a guide, which I think it is, once they lift those price controls, let's say in 2024 or 2025, I would expect the CPI to go from, I mean, it probably could follow the same type of path here, how it goes from 6.87% down to, let's say 4%, and then it just goes straight up. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it got up to 12, 15. I wouldn't be surprised if it got up to 20%. And then you've got to ask yourself the question, what does the Fed do then? What does the government do? What do asset prices do in that environment? And what does the standard of living for the average American, what does the standard of living do in that type of environment? And obviously the answer gets dramatically lower. So history doesn't always repeat, but it usually rhymes. And so I think it's very important that we look at the world around us and all of these variables at play, all these economic variables and these political variables. And then we go back in time and try to see, okay, when did we have this type of setup here in the United States in the past? And I'm not saying the 70s are exactly like the 2020s. I think that probably we'll see more like the 1940s possibly. But what we can tell is when they implement price controls, this is usually what happens. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, what's the probability of them implementing price controls into 2022, 2023? And I think the probability is high. I would say over 50%. Why? Because the Fed is trying to raise rates. They've got to combat inflation, or else Biden's not going to get elected. And in raising rates, they're most likely going to crash the economy, or more specifically, asset prices. And then they're backed into a corner where they either have to let inflation explode or they have to prop up asset prices. And I think the path of least resistance, because they can't do either of those, they want to curb inflation, but yet they also want to prop up asset prices. And the only way to do that, then the release valve there is inflation, obviously. But in order to control that inflation, to curb the inflation, they bring in the price controls, and that's where we go right into the 1970s playbook. So that's what I would be looking out for right now. And this, I think, is going to be one of the biggest events that we could see in 2022. So we've really got to pay attention to this. I think a central bank digital currency is something we need to pay attention to, but that's more 2023, into 2025. This is something that I think should get, there should be a greater sense of urgency in this, requiring our attention and our mental bandwidth. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Always remember to stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll see you in the next video.